Good afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us for our webinar this afternoon. This is particularly focused on non-association independent schools, so you're very, very welcome. If you're not from an independent school, that's also fine because there's lots that you'll hear which will be just as relevant. But we are going to focus specifically on independent schools later on once we've given you lots of the big picture of our renewed framework. So I'm Sue Morris-King. I'm Deputy Director for Schools and Early Education and one of the people who's been very much involved in designing the renewed inspection framework. And Philippa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Lovely to be here. I'm Philippa Darley. I'm one of His Majesty's inspectors, and I work particularly on independent schools policy in the national team with Sue.
Thanks, Philippa. So we're going to take you through lots of aspects, lots of things that we think you want to know about this afternoon about the renewed framework. Thank you very much indeed for anybody who sent questions in advance. We've tried very much to weave some of those answers into the presentation this afternoon. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end to be able to answer any other questions that you might have. So thanks in advance. I hope that lots of what we'll tell you this afternoon will answer those questions anyway. So Philippa and I will turn our cameras off and then we'll go into the presentation. So this is what we're going to talk you through this afternoon. We'll talk you through our journey so far, how we've got to this point. We'll talk to you about moving forward, what's our new approach look like, what the changes mean for schools, particularly for non-association independent schools. What do we mean by a steady and assured start? What will this look like in November? We'll talk to you a little bit about measuring impact. And as I've said, we'll try and take some of your questions at the end. Now, as you'd expect, the renewed education framework, we are determined to raise standards and improve lives with disadvantaged and vulnerable children and learners at the heart of what we do. We know that our work is valued by children and parents and carers and decision makers, but we also know that we need to reset our relationship with the sectors that we inspect and regulate. Now, last year's Big Listen heard from many thousands of parents and professionals, and thank you to you if you contributed to that. And that feedback has helped us to make changes to the way that we work. This year, as you know, we consulted on a new approach to inspecting education providers from this autumn. This includes introducing a new look report card for parents and carers. So we'll be sharing with you today the changes that we'll be making from November 2025 and what they mean for schools. So what do we want to achieve collectively? Each of us, of course, has a desire to work for all pupils and to ensure they receive a high quality of education and training. And that's an education that enables everyone to achieve, belong and thrive. And as you get used to this renewed framework, you'll hear those words quite a lot: achieve, belong and thrive. And of course, that includes achieving great outcomes. And it's about raising standards. Children get one childhood, and we will, of course, continue to put them first. We want great outcomes for all of our children. If we get it right for the most vulnerable, we get it right for all. And for the first time, inclusion will be a focus on every inspection, and more on that in a while. Now, parents through our consultations have told us they want better and more detailed information about where their child's school sits. What are the strengths and the areas for improvement? They want those to be highlighted. And we want to celebrate a school's strengths. We want to validate where leaders are telling us about their school. What are they telling us? And we want to work with leaders to highlight what needs developing further. And as you would expect, we remain committed to improving how it feels to be inspected, while continuing to encourage and support providers to raise standards. Now, really importantly, and this is a question that's come in from quite a lot of people, quite understandably, really importantly, we don't expect any school to be doing more than it needs to just for Ofsted. The inspection toolkit is based on statutory duties and professional guidance. It's based on non-statutory guidance, professional standards, research and inspection evidence. So let's have a look at our journey so far. Following last year's big listen, we set out our ambition to reset relationships with the professionals we inspect and regulate, while maintaining the confidence of children, parents and carers. And this included renewing the education inspection framework and introducing new report cards. Now, I've mentioned our consultation. In February 2025, we had a 12-week consultation, and that set out a series of proposals for change. And that covered early years, state-funded schools, non-association independent schools, further education and skills, and ITE providers. And we had over 6,500 responses. And again, thank you if you were one of those people who told us what you thought. It's all been fully taken into account. And that sat alongside insights from focus groups, expert discussions, test visits, and independent research. And today's changes, the things we're talking about today, are grounded in that rich evidence. Alongside our consultation response, and that's available on gov.uk, we've published updated inspection toolkits and operating guides that reflect a more empathetic, child-focused approach, especially for those who are disadvantaged or vulnerable, while making sure that we don't lose sight of our core purpose and our collective drive to raise standards. And we'll get into the detail of lots of that as we go through the webinar this afternoon. These reforms will come into effect in November 2025 for state-funded schools and for further education colleges. And then for ITE, and importantly, for those of you listening today, you'll want to know this, for independent schools, they'll come into place in January. So let me run through some of the changes that we've made. Now, really importantly to say, our proposals were not set in stone, and we listened really carefully to all of the feedback that we got from the consultation. And we've tested and we've further refined our methodology as we've gone through. And we believe that our new approach represents the right balance between the interests of parents and children, the wishes of education professionals. Our core purpose and our driving mission is to keep children and learners safe and improve their lives. So what about the key changes? You can see those on the screen. We have a new inspection report card. Now that's about highlighting excellence and identifying areas for improvement. So it's about driving high and rising standards. The report card is designed to provide more nuance for parents and providers. It combines at-a-glance grades with narrative summaries of strengths and areas for improvement. And as we've gone through, it's been redesigned to make it more accessible for parents and carers, and particularly on mobile devices, as that's where most people want to read inspection reports. We've got a new 5-point grading scale, and that's about setting higher expectations while encouraging improvement where it's needed. Now, in response to feedback from professionals and parents about the terminology that we proposed in the initial consultation, the final set of grades has changed, and the words are urgent improvement, needs attention, expected standard, strong standard, and exceptional, to identify the very best provision in the country. Now, in a change from the initial proposals, providers won't be asked to submit case studies for approval for exceptional. Instead, inspectors will evaluate this grade. They'll evaluate that exceptional practice by applying the toolkit. And of course, that'll be subject to the usual quality assurance and consistency checking. Now, we have a renewed focus on inclusion, and that's by introducing a new inclusion evaluation area to help break down barriers to learning and well-being. Inspectors will evaluate whether schools are providing high-quality support for all pupils, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds, those who have SEND, and those who are known to social care. We have new inspection toolkits for grading providers, and I'm sure you'll be aware of those. You might have had a chance to look already, and if you haven't, you'll be able to find those on our website when you want to look at them. These toolkits show schools and inspectors the evaluation areas that we'll focus on, and it shows how we will evaluate and grade schools. Now, there's a wider range of evaluation areas than in our current methodology, and more in that in due course. But following feedback, the number of core evaluation areas has been streamlined. Also, in response to feedback that we heard through the consultation, The definitions of grades have been tightened to more clearly differentiate between them. The standards covered in the toolkits have also been slimmed down to provide greater clarity on the evidence that inspectors will evaluate. Now we have a new inspection methodology, and a lot of this is about reducing workload for the education workforce. Now, much of our new inspection methodology comprises of inspection activities you'll already be familiar with, such as speaking with parents and pupils and visiting lessons. And the toolkits are designed to assess the professional standards and the statutory and non-statutory requirements already placed on schools. There are new operating guides that set out the times at which inspectors can arrive on site and the suggested latest times they should be departing. And that's about capping the length of those inspection days. And we'll evaluate schools' work to support and promote leaders and staff's well-being. And that will be considered as part of the leadership and governance evaluation area. And inspection findings will be grounded in a clear understanding of each school's unique circumstances. And I know that is particularly important to you in the non-association independent school sector, as you have such a very, very varied set of schools that sit inside this part of the sector. The new operating guides set out how leaders and inspectors will reflect on a school's context and priorities. We have a new online insights platform called Ofsted Explore an Area, giving parents key information about the education and care services in their local area. There's a new system for monitoring schools where improvement is needed, and to drive consistent and fair inspections. Independent school inspections and all school inspections will be led by full-time His Majesty's inspectors. Now, these experienced inspectors will oversee the inspection, building a professional relationship with leaders, including any nominee, to deliver a more collaborative experience. In addition, Ofsted will introduce a programme of work to evaluate consistency in school inspections. And there's increased resource and training for inspection teams, and that will drive quality and consistency. An additional school inspector will add capacity to the team, allowing the lead inspector to spend more time with the leaders, including any nominee, as well as overseeing and quality assuring the inspection. So let's look at how this is going to look moving forwards. What about our renewed approach? So we will put children and pupils first, as you'd expect, breaking down barriers by raising standards up, especially for the most disadvantaged and vulnerable pupils. We'll improve the way we report and the content of inspection findings to parents and carers. We'll improve the look and feel of inspections for education providers and professionals, and there'll be a more collaborative approach. That's a really important part of what we're going to do. We'll maintain our focus on having care and concern for the well-being and workload of those we inspect, as I've already mentioned. We'll take context into greater account on inspection. We'll make inspections consistent in approach and continue to improve our process for allowing inspections to be challenged. We'll provide constructive advice to improve based on conversations with leaders. And different by design, we further tailored our inspection approach to each remit and provision type. And as I mentioned, we have strengthened our approach to inclusion. Let's have a look at this in more detail as how we've done this under the new framework. So we'll put children and pupils first, breaking down barriers by raising standards, especially for disadvantaged and vulnerable children. This is why we're introducing a separate inclusion evaluation area, and inclusion will also be a theme across other evaluation areas. And as part of this evaluation area, our inspections will look at how providers are addressing barriers to learning for all pupils. And we'll always start with those the government asks schools to focus on, whether through schools' statutory obligations or non-statutory guidance. And this is why we're particularly emphasising those from socio-economically disadvantaged backgrounds, those with SEND, and those known or previously known to children's social care. We'll also evaluate how well providers ensure that there's high quality support for all pupils who may face other barriers to their learning and or well-being. And we'll work with the school to understand their context, informed by demographic information and by professional dialogue. And as part of understanding the barriers most relevant to a provider, Inspectors will make use of demographic data to understand a school's context. Crucially, we'll do a lot of that through talking to you as leaders to understand the context in which you are working and the particular barriers that your pupils may face. And then as we form our evaluation of inclusion, we'll consider the systems and processes that leaders put in place to identify the needs of pupils at their school and to address and review the support they receive. And in addition to that, each area of the toolkit will have a focus on those pupils who face the greatest barriers to ensure that everything for all pupils, be that the teaching and curriculum, the school's practice around attendance and behaviour, or personal and development and well-being, are suitable for all the pupils in the school. Now, when we talk about strength and focus on inclusion, we're talking about how inspectors will gather evidence in a rounded and meaningful way. And it's not about one-off checks, it's about understanding how leaders support every pupil, especially those facing those barriers to learning and or well-being. First of all, we'll talk with leaders about how pupils' needs are identified and met. And that professional dialogue helps us to understand the systems in place and how leaders monitor whether the school is making a difference. Secondly, we'll look at contextual data, and we know that the numbers alone don't tell the full story, but they do help to frame questions, and we'll build on that through discussions with leaders. And then thirdly, case sampling. Now, this is a form of initial evidence gathering which helps us to understand the outcomes and experiences of pupils who face barriers. And through the test visits, we've found that this has worked really well, and it's worked very well in the independent schools that we have visited, including those with pupils with special educational needs. It involves selecting a small sample of pupils and tracking them across inspection activities to gain a deeper understanding of their experiences and outcomes. This is then connected to wider evidence about the outcomes and experiences for all pupils. And it's important to emphasise that case sampling isn't the same as a case study. We don't want you or need you in any way to prepare anything, any case studies for an inspection. We'll just talk to you about your pupils and we'll see them in situ and we'll talk to you about how they're getting on. And finally, we'll go on learning walks with leaders, and these are opportunities to evaluate inclusion in action across classrooms and subjects and connecting what leaders tell us with what pupils are experiencing day to day. And by combining these approaches, we'll build a picture that is fair and evidence-based and really rooted in each school's context. So I talked about the evaluation areas earlier and the fact that we have fewer than in the consultation. So you can see them on the screen, the evaluation areas. In response to what we heard in the consultation, we've reduced the number from those that we initially proposed. And you can see them on the screen. These are the ones that we have. So we have safeguarding, inclusion, curriculum and teaching, achievement, attendance and behaviour, personal development and well-being, early years if you have that phase, post 16 again if you have that phase, and leadership and governance. And you'll see if you have had anything to do with the original toolkits that we published for the consultation, you might notice that attendance and behaviour now form one evaluation area, and also that curriculum and teaching that were separate in the original consultation are now together as one. And then safeguarding standards will be given a met or not met evaluation. Toolkits will introduce toolkits, and these toolkits show schools and inspectors the evaluation areas that we'll focus on, and within them the standards that we'll evaluate to inform grading. The inspection toolkit is based on statutory duties, non-statutory guidance, professional standards, as I've mentioned already. The toolkit isn't a checklist. It's about guiding conversations, and it's about helping inspectors and schools leaders to reflect together on evidence and making sure that the grades reflect the evidence gathered. Supports a shared understanding and discussion of the strengths of the school's work and its context and those areas that we need to explore further. And as we've said, nothing in the standards set out in the toolkits should add to a school's workload, and nor do we expect schools to have completed any formal self-evaluation. However, you might wish to use the toolkit to support continuing improvement. And when we phone for that initial conversation before the inspection, We'll expect leaders to share their strengths and successes and priorities with us. Now, the general structure of the toolkits is the same, whatever remit. There's an evaluation area summary, an explanation of how that's applied to different schools' context and provision types. There's an explanation of the evidence that inspectors will gather, and finally the grading standards, and more on that in a moment as we move on shortly. And we've carefully reflected on evaluation areas in our consultation and how these should apply in different sectors. So let's have a look at the toolkits in a bit more detail. As you can see on the screen, what we have is a covering page for each evaluation area, and that includes a summative statement at the top of what that evaluation area covers. And this is designed to help schools and inspectors to see at a glance what that evaluation area is about. So you can see on the screen it says this evaluation area considers whether, and it talks you through the kind of things that this area is about. And then after that, there's a statement that reminds us that our grading standards are based on what schools are already required to do, as I've mentioned several times already. And as HMCI, Sir Martin Oliver, stated in April in his speech at the Guildhall, he said, the toolkit will make it clearer than we ever have that schools shouldn't be doing anything just for the days that our inspectors come in. They shouldn't be spending a single minute or penny on anything that isn't in the best interests of your children. The toolkit then sets out the most significant contributory factors that underpin our approaches to evidence gathering and grading. And this is very much based on the research that underpinned the EIF, the Education Inspection Framework. So we've been clear that our renewed framework will ensure that there's consistency in inspection practice. And we've also made sure that the toolkit's reflective of each remit and the differing phases and provider types within it. So in our toolkit, we've included an explanation of how the toolkit should be applied within different provider types within a remit. So for example, in curriculum and teaching, inspectors will consider what practice looks like in the early years in primary, in secondary, and in post-16. So in early years, we'll consider how well the youngest children are developing strong foundations such as early communication, language and number skills. In primary, the focus is on how well leaders ensure that pupils build secure knowledge and skills across the curriculum, with reading and mathematics at the core. And then in secondary, inspectors will consider how the curriculum builds subject expertise and supports progression. While for post-16, we'll look at how well provision equips young people for the next stage of education, training or work. So in short, the toolkit seeks to make it clear how we will apply each evaluation area in a school and what inspectors will be looking at in practice. And then once we've set out what an evaluation area covers, the toolkit then moves on to more detail about the kinds of evidence inspectors will gather. Each evaluation area considers themes, as you see on the slide, and below that, prompts that guide our conversations and observations. Each evaluation area always starts with a theme about strategic leadership of that area, and it ends with a theme about inclusive practices in that area. Now, these prompts aren't a checklist for schools. They're there to help us, inspectors, think about the right questions, to help inspectors to explore evidence in context, and to make sure that evaluations are consistent and fair. For example, in curriculum and teaching, inspectors will consider how well the curriculum is sequenced or how teachers adapt their approaches for pupils with different starting points. And then in leadership, prompts will focus on how leaders set direction, monitor impact and support development. So the key takeaway from this slide is that the toolkit makes inspection more transparent, and that's a really important part of what we're aiming for here. We and leaders can see the themes we'll explore and the type of questions that will help to shape evidence gathering. And then we come to the next section in each evaluation area. Each evaluation area in the toolkit is graded on a 5-point scale. And this is with the exception of safeguarding, as I mentioned, which is met or not met. And what you can see here are the grades we expect to see the most often on inspection. Needs attention, expected standard, strong standard. Now, the expected standard in the middle, this is the baseline for inspection. It reflects what's required of schools, and it's a starting point for all inspections, and this is why it's on the centre of the page. We start each inspection with the premise that a school is meeting the expected standard. Importantly, one clear distinction is that we will be looking for a secure fit, not a best fit. That is, to meet the expected standard, a school will need to meet all of the standards in that column. To meet the strong standard, a school will need to meet all the standards in expected and strong. And you'll see words such as typically and generally in the expected standard when you have a chance to look at the toolkit in more detail. And that's to recognise that the expected standard is not about perfection. For example, a school might have a subject that's being developed well, but does not yet quite meet the same standards as others consistently. So if that was the case, a school would still be graded as having a secure fit within the expected standard. The needs attention column, now these are indicators rather than standards. An evaluation area is likely to be needs attention when there is not a secure fit for the expected standard. And the indicators in this column and the last 3 bullets on the slide here are designed to exemplify why a school might not be meeting the expected standard. Now, these indicators are deliberately worded positively to acknowledge what leaders are doing, but pointing out where something needs attention, as it's not a secure fit within the expected standard. And they're worded in a similar way in each evaluation area. Now, a really important point here, we've said all along from the start of the consultation that we expect more schools to have varied grade profiles, including potentially areas that need attention. So Martin Oliver has often referenced the need for more nuanced grading, stating that grades for specific evaluation areas will allow for a more detailed and representative evaluation of any one school. Individual grading of the evaluation areas will also enable parents and carers to be able to see in more detail what's special about their school, what it does well, and what leaders are working on. And as Lee Austin, our National Director, has stated, needs attention is not a fail. It's a bit like if you take your car for an MOT and it passes, but it gets an advisory notice. If you don't pay attention to this, it could be a problem in the future. Now, on the previous slide, we looked at the grades that inspectors will use most often. And here we're focusing on the 2 ends of the scale that we expect to see much less frequently: urgent improvement and exceptional. Urgent improvement applies where the expected standards have clearly not been met and where there are serious concerns about the impact of the school's work in the relevant evaluation area. The indicators explain what this might look like in practice. And these are occasions where significant improvement is needed. And at the other end of this scale is exceptional. This grade is for areas where the evidence shows that the standards are not only strong, but truly transformational. And this means everything in the strong standard is already being met securely and consistently, and leaders are making a sustained difference for pupils. Both urgent improvement and exceptional are important parts of the 5-point scale, but they'll be much less common in practice. The majority of evaluations will fall into the middle 3 grades that we just looked at on the previous slide. So let's remind ourselves of some of the key aspects underpinning our renewed approach. Inspections will look and feel different. That's really important, and you can see that on the slide. We're moving into a more supportive, empathetic approach to inspections, in which the starting point will be the expected standard. I've mentioned already that we will take further into account each provider's context, and we'll adapt a more collaborative approach. We've extensively tested out our inspection methodology. We've revised our approach to make inspections feel like a more collaborative process, and we'll talk you through that in a moment. Philippa will talk us through this. We'll be consistent in our approach to inspections and continue to improve the process for providers to feed back about their inspection experience. And while no 2 inspections will be the same because every school is different, we have ensured that our inspectors will apply the inspection methodology consistently. We'll provide constructive advice to improve based on our inspection evidence and our discussions, our conversations with you as leaders. And we'll do all this through a values-driven approach to inspection that which is professional, empathetic, respectful, and courteous. And we will run with the Ofsted Academy the largest package of training that Ofsted has ever offered for inspection launch to inspectors. Our inspectors are already a long way through that training with lots of what we're calling underpinning skills program and lots of face-to-face training about to take place in the next couple of weeks. So I'm going to hand over now to Philippa, and Philippa is going to take us into the methodology of what an inspection will look and feel like.
Thank you, Sue. So over the next few slides, what we're going to do is provide you with a broad overview of what the inspection process looks like. The first thing is before inspectors arrive, there are already several steps that help get the inspection off to a smooth start. So in preparing for the inspection, your inspectors are going to review information such as your previous inspection reports, your website, and any local authority information. And all of this preparation that the lead inspector is going to be doing is outlined in the operational guide that you can find on the Ofsted website. So the first contact you'll have from your lead inspector is through the notification call, which is what we've always done. And while this is still the moment you're going to be formally told about the inspection, it's going to be more than just a quick announcement. The lead inspector will use it to begin a constructive and professional conversation with you, setting the tone for the whole inspection. They're going to ask you about your school's context, they're going to check on your well-being, and they'll agree a time for the longer planning call later on that day. You'll be asked to nominate someone to act as the main link with the inspection team, and we're calling that person the nominee. They're going to be there to help with communication, logistics, and just making sure that the school's context is properly understood by all inspectors. This role is not compulsory, and you are not at disadvantage if you choose not to have a nominee. And there is optional training available for nominees to further support them in this role. So after the notification call, the planning call that follows is a longer collaborative conversation. Inspectors will listen to you outline your school's context, your successes, your strengths, and priorities. And we're going to work with you to co-construct the day one inspection plan, confirm any reasonable adjustments that might be needed, and discuss how evidence will be gathered as well. The aim for us is to make sure that our inspectors arrive already clear about every school's specific circumstances and the things that matter most in that school. So while the steps we've just gone through may sound familiar, what has changed is the emphasis. There's going to be more consideration of context from the very first phone call and a more collaborative approach to shaping the inspection before inspectors even arrive on site. So, in terms of how the inspection will be structured, and you'll hear lead inspectors talk about these three main principles. Inspectors are going to be gathering evidence to enable them to evidence these three things. They want to celebrate the strengths in pupils' achievement, belonging, and ability to thrive. They want to validate your priorities and progress, and they want to highlight with you priorities for improvement. As you know, in independent schools, the lead inspector arrives on site for a half day before the full inspection gets underway. And on that first half day, the lead inspector will start with a brief meeting with the school leaders. And if you want them to, they'll also speak with staff. The lead inspector will check the single central record early on. And then leaders will be able to walk their school with the lead, His Majesty's inspector. And this is an important opportunity for you to show the lead inspector their context. This first half day will also continue to focus on aspects of the independent school standards, such as premises and welfare, health and safety, just as we have done in the past. First-hand evidence gathering with a strong focus on pupils' experiences begins early on, particularly how pupils are included and how they're kept safe. Inspectors are going to speak to pupils during lessons and social times, visit classrooms alongside leaders, and walk the school to connect leadership priorities with what pupils are actually experiencing. And these activities allow for ongoing professional dialogue between inspectors and leaders. Inspectors are going to look really closely at how support is provided to pupils who may need extra help. using case sampling, as Sue mentioned earlier, to understand how inclusion works in practice. And this broad approach helps build a clear picture of how well the school supports pupils to achieve, belong, and thrive. Inspectors may carry laptops during their visits, but not always. And when they don't, they'll need time back in the team room to record their observations. There will be several opportunities for leaders and the nominee, where there is one, to meet with the inspection team to discuss the emerging findings. The first of these reflection meetings will typically take place around lunchtime on the second day. These discussions will promote open, professional dialogue and allow for adjustments to the inspection plan based on what inspectors are seeing. That afternoon will continue with further evidence gathering and focused leadership meetings, including one with a designated senior lead, if that hasn't already taken place on that first afternoon when the lead inspector is in school. These meetings, which will be planned in advance, will help inspectors explore key areas such as inclusion and leadership in greater depth. And then the day will end with a final reflection meeting between inspectors and leaders. And typically, you should expect leaders to leave your school site at 5 o'clock. So in terms of the final day of an inspection of a non-association independent school, it will start again with a reflection meeting, and it will conclude with the final grading meeting. Inspectors are going to gather evidence through inspection activities that have been confirmed at the end of the previous day. They will probably conduct further learning walks and, where appropriate, expand their case sampling in keeping with our focus on pupils who are disadvantaged, those with special educational needs and/or disabilities, and those who are known or have been previously known to social care, or any pupil who has other barriers to their learning and/or well-being. Professional dialogue is going to continue throughout, and it will be rooted in the evidence that's been gathered and the inspection toolkit. These discussions will be ongoing through evidence gathering activities and in reflection meetings between inspectors and leaders, including the nominee where the school has chosen to have one. The final meeting will be the formal grading meeting, and this is when inspectors evaluate the evidence gathered, including that already shared and discussed at the previous reflection meetings. Provisional, final grades will be determined based on the secure fit. And this meeting will be followed by the final feedback meeting, in which provisional grades, grounded in the evidence gathered, will be shared. And this feedback will cover all the points that will then appear in the written report card. So we're moving on now to consider what this means specifically for non-association independent schools. One of the things we know at Ofsted is that no one independent school is the same as another. And the lead inspector will want to understand the structure, organisation and curriculum of your school. You as leaders are best placed to know the context of your school and the needs of your pupils. So throughout the inspection, starting during that planning call, it will be helpful to inspectors for you to share as much information about context and curriculum. This discussion will include provision, for example, for 2 and 3-year-olds, where that's applicable. As part of this initial discussion, the lead inspector will want to understand the role of the proprietor and, where you have any, the role of those who are responsible for governance. Inspectors will also want to understand the nature of your pupil cohorts and how you identify and meet their needs. This will help inspectors to evaluate the extent to which pupils achieve, belong, and thrive. And just to draw your attention to bullet point 3, inspectors will, of course, be checking that each of the independent school standards are met. Typically, as I mentioned before, specific inspection activities on the first afternoon will be arranged to enable us to gather evidence relating to aspects of the standards that are not gathered through usual inspection activity. The other independent school standards, for example, the curriculum and teaching standards, are threaded through the toolkit evaluation areas. So if a school meets the expected standard in an evaluation area, this means that they will also be meeting the associated independent school standards. Inspectors are always going to be mindful of the demands on your time, in particular in small independent schools where we know leaders can have many responsibilities. Where an independent school has a primary phase, inspectors will focus on communication and language, reading, spelling, handwriting, and mathematics through their learning walks and through case sampling. Initially, this will be in early years and Key Stage 1, although we do know that for independent special schools, this will need to be for older pupils as well. And this focus on strong foundations will be threaded through inspectors' evidence gathering across the curriculum and teaching and the achievement evaluation areas. It will include learning walks in Key Stage 2 in a primary school, which will most likely be in the afternoon of day 2. These later learning walks will broaden the evidence base to include foundation subjects. So while we'll not be doing a reading deep dive, we will typically hear some pupils read. Our focus on the importance of reading is not diminished in this renewed approach. Where there's a secondary phase, the lead inspector will use your insights and information from their preparation to identify agreed groups of subjects for the learning walks. Our focus on foundational knowledge remains, making sure that all pupils have those critical literacy and numeracy skills that are essential for all learning, training, and employment. If you're a school with a sixth form, inspectors will also work with leaders to ensure that post-16 provision is included in each relevant inspection activity. And of course, across all phases, the focus on disadvantaged pupils, those with SEND, and those who are vulnerable will be a central focus of all our evidence gathering activities. As now, inspectors will want to understand leaders' rationale for the use of any alternative provision and that this is in the best interests of those pupils who attend. And then finally, just a few words about reflection meetings. There'll be several opportunities, as I've mentioned, for leaders and the nominee, where there is one, to meet with the inspection team and to discuss emerging findings. The purpose of these discussions is to promote open professional dialogue and allow for adjustments to the inspection plan based on what inspectors are seeing. These meetings are an opportunity for us all to review the evidence. You can also discuss whether any inspection activity needs to be adapted in light of emerging evidence. These meetings will allow you to identify any evidence that you feel is pertinent in reaching a well-rounded understanding of how the school normally operates. They will be rooted in an ongoing review of the toolkit evaluation areas covered in the inspection activities so far. And as we've said, each day will end with a final reflection meeting between inspectors and leaders. So what does this mean for an independent special school? In specialist provision, inspectors will seek to understand the school's culture and breadth of support offered to pupils throughout the day. For example, at the start of the school day, inspectors may wish to see pupils transitioning from the taxis and buses that they arrive in and with their parents. We know that a special school is not required to appoint a special educational needs coordinator. However, it is likely that a member of staff will be coordinating provision and support for pupils with SEND, and inspectors will therefore work closely with this member of staff or this team of staff throughout the inspection. For pupils with SEND in specialist settings, inspectors will consider how leaders and staff support pupils with emotional, mental health, or medical needs that affect attendance, and how leaders and staff help these pupils to attend more regularly. This may include working with parents, carers, and professionals. Inspectors will also understand that some pupils will need additional support to help them manage their behaviour and emotional regulation, and inspectors will explore leaders' work over time and the impact of this work on helping pupils to meet their high expectations. Inspectors will also consider how leaders and staff work with medical professionals and other specialists to support access to education and attendance at school as appropriate. For pupils who are educated under Section 19 duties because they're unwell, included those who are educated in hospitals. For those settings where they have pupils who've previously had low attendance or disruption to their education, inspectors will recognise that this may well affect the school's overall attendance or rates of persistent absence. Inspectors will pay particular attention to the impact of the school's work to improve attendance rapidly for these pupils and to maintain those improvements over time. And then again, when inspectors are evaluating personal development and well-being for pupils with SEND in specialist settings, they'll seek to understand the school's priorities for the personal development of individual pupils and its approaches to developing and providing a personal development programme, including careers education, which will be matched to those pupils' needs. Inspectors will understand that pupils' participation in enrichment opportunities may vary according to their needs and circumstances. And inspectors will always recognise that these pupils may face increased risks relating to their age rather than their developmental stage. Inspectors will seek to understand how the school supports pupils with SEND to access, in ways which are developmentally suitable, the age-appropriate content they need to keep themselves healthy and safe. So just to summarise, our new approach builds on what we know are highly effective evidence-gathering activities. However, we expect inspections to look and feel different as we build a more detailed understanding of an individual school's context from the outset. We will be celebrating what school leaders are proud of, validating their reflections, and highlighting with leaders what their priorities for improvement are. Inspectors are going to prioritise being out and about around the school site as soon as practicable on day one. While we're no longer carrying out deep dives, we will carry out learning walks, each with a focus that is based on what has been discussed in the planning calls and rooted in the school's context and leaders' priorities. Inspectors will carry out case sampling to get a detailed understanding of the school's provision for pupils who are disadvantaged, those with SEND, and those that are vulnerable. Professional discussions, including those in reflection meetings, will be a key part of our new approach. So moving on to the report card. As Sue mentioned earlier, we're going to bring together the most popular preferences of parents and professionals by combining separate grades, rating scales, and short summaries into our new report cards. The narrative gives a detailed picture of performance, whilst the 5-point scale offers the clarity and simplicity that parents have asked for. We will also, as part of this, publish the Independent School Standards Compliance Record under the report card. So, at the end of the inspection, the lead inspector will write a report card, which will, as it says on this side, reflect the gathered evidence, be clear and concise and focused on what matters most, explain the grade that's given for each evaluation area, make clear what the school should improve, and be consistent with the verbal feedback that's been given to the school at the end of the inspection. The key message here is that the report card will really capture the most notable features of the school and do so in a way that's truly reflective of the school and its context. In terms of post-inspection arrangements, these are similar to what they are now, including our report publication and the timescales for these. And now I'm going to hand back to Sue, who's going to give you the timeline for when these changes are going to come into effect.
Thanks, Philippa. So I'll just take us through a little bit of this before we sort of finish off and have time, hopefully, for a couple of questions. So our response to the consultation has been published, as I said, and you'll find that on gov.uk. I've also mentioned earlier that all inspectors will have comprehensive training to support that transition to the new framework before they're deployed onto a live inspection. And you might want to know that for openness and transparency, full inspector training materials will be published online. We've been doing this for a while now, and they will be published once all the training has finished for inspectors. So you'll be able to see that there. Now, in addition to the training package, Ofsted will undertake pilot visits to volunteer settings, giving inspectors vital experience of full end-to-end inspections before November, and they'll be quality assured by Ofsted's National Director for Education, who is our principal inspector. I mentioned that we will resume inspections under the renewed framework in November for maintained schools, and a couple of questions that I picked up in the chat, so I want to make this really, really clear. Standard inspections of independent schools are continuing through the first half of the autumn term under the current EIF. And that's to ensure that all schools receive a standard inspection within the current cycle. And then additional inspections of independent schools will also continue as commissioned by the DfE. And then the standard inspections for non-association independent schools under the renewed framework will then begin in January 2026. So you can see that on the slide actually, January 2026 for independent schools. And then once we begin our inspections for maintained schools in November, we'll go through what we're calling our steady and assured start. And there might be some people interested in that, so I'll quickly run through those bit of detail here. And that's about reassuring education providers about that November rollout. So it will be something that we will support a steady and assured start. We'll have fewer inspections to begin with, and they're being led by our most senior and experienced inspectors. That will be HMI, assisted by Ofsted's in-house teams, such as the policy team that Philippa and I both work in. In the autumn term, there'll be a random sample of providers who will be asked to take part in exit interviews with HMCI and with the National Director. So we're going to listen very, very carefully as to the experience that people are having. And then HMCI will also invite sector representatives to round table meetings so they can share their thoughts on how things have gone for them during their inspections. Occasionally we get deferrals. In this time, we will consider them very carefully. We always do. But in this case, the Deputy Chief Inspector will make sure each case is treated with real sensitivity and consideration. And the telephone helpline will be open during and after inspection as well as in it. And there won't be any inspections in that week before Christmas. And that will help for inspector training. And then finally, just a few words on measuring the impact of our changes. How do we know that things are working as we determined that we designed that they would? And we'll do that by delivering a programme evaluation to understand the implementation and the impact of our reforms. And there'll be various parts to this. An externally commissioned evaluation. We've got an independent supplier who's delivering a baseline study in this term, summer and autumn 2025. There will be some preliminary in-depth research in the spring 26, and then there'll be a rolling programme to evaluate how well this is going. And alongside this, we talk a lot about consistency, don't we? And there will be a programme of work to measure our consistency. And then further planned evaluation of the changes, such as engagement with parents and carers and providers and inspectors about the implementation of the framework, will take place. So that comes to the end of our input this afternoon. I'm just going to leave that slide on the screen for you because in here sits the answer to quite a few of the questions that people have asked about some of the logistical angle and some of the logistical aspects of inspection, things like start times and, how long inspections last and what kind of things will be happening on the inspection. We've told you quite a lot of those things as we've gone along, but you'll find lots of those answers in the inspection information document that you can find online and in the toolkit that you can see mentioned there. That's the document for inspectors, but it's there for you as well to look at if you so wish. And the toolkit's certainly very, very useful to have a look at. And our colleague Lillian has just put a note in the chat to tell you a little bit more about what you'll find when you go on there. So Emily, if you wouldn't mind stopping sharing the slides, and Philippa and I will just come back on camera, and I think we've just got a little bit of time to answer a couple of questions that people have asked. Now, Philippa, I think this one is for you. So somebody's asked about whether any pilots have taken place in independent schools.
Yes, lots of them. We've been piloting since February. In fact, I was out myself for one-day pilot visits from February, and then across the summer term, we did full end-to-end inspections. We've piloted it across a whole range of independent schools, and in fact, we're still piloting now. I'm actually, as I speak, this week on an independent school pilot to a special school. in one of our regions that have volunteered for a pilot. So yes, we have, and the feedback, I have to say, from head teachers and proprietors has been really, really positive about the renewed approach and about how much more closely we are working with schools to understand their context in particular.
Thanks, Philippa. And I think another piece of the feedback's been positive around inclusion, hasn't it? Around our focus on inclusion, that I think is working well. I think, you know, we set out from the start, as Philippa said, to make sure that we included independent schools in all of the test visits that we did, because that was crucial to get it right from the start. And what we found has been reflected, hasn't it, in the changes that we've made as we've gone along to the toolkit and to the operating guide. Another one, Philippa, that I think is one for you, which is, will there be any changes to the independent school standards? Somebody wanted to know.
I suppose the shortest answer is no, but also it's just worthwhile bearing in mind that obviously we don't own the independent school standards. The standards are owned by the Department for Education, but no, they remain as they are, and we will continue to inspect them as we always have done under the EIF. I think I mentioned it in my presentation that we'll focus very much on pulling evidence for the standards through usual inspection activity, so it doesn't create more workload for leaders during the course of the inspection.
Absolutely, thank you. And somebody asked a question about what plans have we got as Ofsted to help train and support local authority colleagues, including early years advisors and teams, with regard to the new inspection. Now, I mean, we know that quite a few colleagues from local authorities have signed up to these webinars. These webinars will be available for people to be able to see on YouTube in due course, so people will be able to do it in that way. But also our regional directors and our assistant regional directors have a lot of relationship with local authorities. They work very closely to communicate to local authorities, and I know that our regional directors and assistant regional directors are putting on various engagement events for local authority colleagues, so people will be able to engage in that way. And then there's, I think, time just for one more, and I think it's a really good one to end on, because somebody asked, and it's such a good question, once the framework comes into place, how long will schools have to implement the changes? Now, I really hope that from what Philippa and I have said today, you'll feel confident that there aren't any changes that we expect you as school leaders to implement. The changes are just about how we inspect. And I mentioned quite a lot of times as we went through that everything that is in the toolkit, everything that is there is about things that you do day in, day out for your children and young people based on statutory and non-statutory guidance, professional standards, in the case of independent schools, on the independent school standards as part of that. And I mentioned about what Sir Martin had said in one of his speeches, in terms of, we don't want you to be doing anything for the days the inspectors come in. This is about what you do day in, day out for your children and your young people in your schools. So I hope that you feel reassured by that message today throughout everything that we have said. Of course, you know, you might want to have a look at the toolkit, you might want to get familiar with it, you might want to look at the documents, and we've put the links there so that you can do it. But it is not about doing anything for Ofsted or for inspection. And that brings us to just after 5 o'clock. So I'm going to just end by saying, Philippa, thank you very much indeed. Colleagues who've supported behind the scenes, thank you. And to everybody who has dialed in and listened today, thank you very much for your time and your attention today. Thank you.